Hey, welcome back. It's Professor Khalil Amani, and this is Khalil Amani's World 100. We're still talking Bible talk, and we want to do a deep dive. We want to do a deep dive on Moses, that whole speak to the rock. Moses being told by God that he cannot go into the land of milk and honey, the land of Canaan, because he didn't follow orders and directions. But I submit to you, this God of the Bible, he's a trickster God. The God of the Hebrews, the God of the Israelites, Yahweh, he's a trickster God. He's a guy that plays with words and semantics, word salad. Oh, he's a tricky little fellow. And I'm going to prove to you on this particular episode why Moses did the right thing and that God basically tricked Moses. He tricked Moses. God set Moses up for the fail. Yes, he did. When I say God, I don't mean the God of the universe, the God of the Bible. It's a qualitative difference. That's right. I'm going to show you what no Christian preacher has ever shown you, no Hebrew Israelite or Israelite teacher has ever taught that I'm aware of. Because I have vision. So welcome back if it's not your first time. If it's your first time, welcome. We teach Bible over here like no other. I am not a part of any organized religion. I am not beholden to any particular religious point of view. Therefore, I can speak the truth without fear or favor. Y'all got it? But Moses was tricked by God. Moses was straight hoodwinked by God. Yes, he was. See, when we read this story about Moses and him hitting, smoting the rock 2 times, and God said, simply speak to the rock. And since Moses did not follow and obey the orders and command of God, he can't go to Canaan. He got to go up in the mountain and write his own obituary and obsequy. He got to write his own stuff. He got to do his own eulogy, which we read about in the 32nd chapter of Deuteronomy. A man who writes about his own death, where he going to be buried. He put in a sepulcher, and supposedly no man knows where he was buried. Pure mythology, I tell you. But I got to thinking about that story after I did the last part, and I said, I need to do a deeper dive because there's something fishy going on here. Something is missing. Why does Moses decide to smote or hit the rock 2 times instead of just speaking to the rock as God commanded him to? I got to thinking about it. I said, what would cause Moses to do some shit that God never told him to do? What would make Moses be so arrogant as to say, how many times must we meaning himself and Aaron, provide sustenance, food and water for you rebels, you children of Israel? I said, man, that was out of character. I got to thinking about it. I said, something's missing from the story. And God damn it, I opened my Bible and I went back to read a little bit earlier. I said, I went back to read a little earlier. And I said, voila! The light bulb went off in my head as to why we get this story of this angry Moses who smites or smote or hit the rock 2 times even though God simply told him to speak to the rock. Something just didn't jive with that story. And when I hear Christians and Hebrew Israelites teach this, they always miss a very, very important point that I'm going to share with you all. I'm going to show you the reason why Moses smote or hit the rock 2 times. At first I was thinking he was just acting on his own. He just created some shit, some Houdini shit, you know, abracadabra, Shazam. At first I thought Moses was trying to be theatrical because God simply tells Moses, just speak to the rock. Why would Moses not obey God and not speak to the rock, but would take his rod, and hit the rock twice? Bam, bam. The water came out. But that's not what God told him to do. I said, was Moses doing a Proverbs 3 and 6, I believe it is? Lean not to thine own understanding. Was Moses thinking as an individual when he defied the commandments of God? I started thinking these things last night as I was listening to the replay of the last video. It made me get my Bible out and do some backwards reading, because I know there was something missing, that the story was incomplete. Even though I've never heard a preacher, a teacher, a rabbi, a Christian pastor, an Israelite teacher, I've never heard any of them do this compare and contrast that I'm about to do. I've never heard nobody. This is all new stuff. Because I'm like that. I search for the truth without worrying about what other folks say. And the conclusion of this matter is that God set Moses up. God set Moses up for the kill with some tricky wordplay. And it involved the rod. It involved the rod. That's right. That sneaky and that pesky rod. You know, that staff that Moses carries around and holds up and shit. God gave him that rod. And God would use that rod against Moses in the final analysis. In the final showdown between God and Moses, God would use the rod that he would give Moses. That rod used to work miracles before. Because that rod used to work miracles, and we are going to go through a few scriptures to show that God made Moses use that rod to perform miracles. And then I started thinking, well, maybe that's why he took the rod and smoked and hit the rock. Because the rod was a constant companion of Moses. It was something he held in his hand everywhere he went. I got to thinking maybe he wasn't thinking as an individual and outside of the box after all. And he wasn't. For God set Moses up. God never intended Moses to see the promised land. Oh, God is a tricky fellow. He's a tricky fellow. Yes, he is. God is a tricky fellow. Yes, he is. I said God, the God of the Bible, he's a trickster God. And he set Moses up, and I'm going to prove it. I said the God of the Bible, he set Moses up for failure. He straight pulled a Houdini on Moses. He straight did a 3-card Monty on Moses. He straight did some psychological Ivan Pavlov, the psychologist, Pavlov's dog on Moses, and I'm going to prove it. I'm going to prove that when Moses smoked the rock, instead of speaking to the rock, he was operating on a response. He was operating on a psychological response that God had already put in his brain. So much so that he didn't even think about the specificity of the words God said when he said, speak to the rock. And out of reaction formation, out of repetition, out of the fact that Moses had been using his rod to do many miracles. And this is why when God says, speak to the rock, and Moses being angry at the children of Israel anyway, because he felt like they were threatening to kill him. We're going to see all this. And so his natural response as a human being to act in anger and to use the very tool, the very weapon that God had equipped him with, the rod, that he had used before to show miracles, and that's why he would use the rod again to smite or to hit the rock. He went against what God said, but it's God's fault because God used that rod as a repetitious tool for Moses, and it was only repetition. It was second nature, and it was reflex that made him not speak to the rock, but hit the rock. So first, I want to go to the actual story where Moses smites or smoked the rock, and God told him, you ain't going over into Canaan because you disobeyed me. I want to read that first, and that's Numbers, the 20th chapter. We're doing a deep dive in this stuff. We're doing a deep dive. So let's go back and review the story that got Moses in hot water. Okay, let's do that first. I said we're talking Numbers chapter 20. Chapter 20. We'll just read it. It says, water from the rock. Water from the rock. Change glasses. Excuse me. Water from the rock. And there was no water for the congregation. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people chode with Moses, argued with Moses, and spake, saying, would God that we had died when our brethren died before the Lord? And why have ye brought up the congregation of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our cattle should die there? And wherefore have ye made us to come up out of Egypt, to bring us into this evil place? It is no place of seed, or of figs, or of vines, or of pomegranates, neither is there any water to drink. And Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And they fell upon their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto them. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, take the rod, and gather thou assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock. So thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts drink. And Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him. Y'all check it out now. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock. And he, Moses, said unto them, Hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beasts also. And the Lord spake unto Moses, Moses and Aaron, because ye believe me not to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given thee. See? There it is. But there's some trickiness going on here. I know most of you all don't see it. But God is a trickster God. And God is not playing fair. He's not playing fair. But let me show you the trick. Let me show you the trick bag that God put Moses in, whereby Moses would disobey his command and smite the rock with his rod. When we read about this story, we read in verse 7 that God said, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, check out what God says. Check out the first thing. See, God is coming to Moses' rescue to get water for the people. But check out the first thing that God tells Moses to do. Take the rod. Why does Moses need a rod when all God told him to do was to speak to the rock? You see the trick bag that God is putting Moses in? The first thing that God says as it relates to getting water for the children of Israel and their beasts, he doesn't just say, I want you to go over to that rock and speak to it. He tells Moses to take your rod. Why does Moses need a rod? Why does Moses need a rod? So automatically Moses takes the rod, thinking that the rod is going to be a part of the miracle of bringing water from the rock. That's an easy deducement. That's an easy conjecture. That can easily be extrapolated when someone says, hey, get your rod. You need water. The people need water. Get your rod. Of course, right away, in Moses' human mind, he thinks that the rod has something to do with the fact that it's going to be used to get water. Not only that, this is not people, listen to me. This is not the first time that God helps Moses get water for the people. Guess what, people? Guess what? The first time that Moses goes to God to get water for the people, guess what God tells Moses to do? He tells Moses to get his rod and to smite the rock. Now we see what's going on here. It's some word salad going on here. It's some misdirection, some sleight of hand, some three-card Monty. God is playing games. He's a trickster God. Oh, you didn't know? See, you know about this particular scripture where God says, speak to the rock, and Moses goes ahead and smites the rock. You've heard of that. But that's the second time that Moses asked God to deliver water. You didn't know that? Oh yeah, it's going to get deep. Like I said last night, something didn't sit right about Moses not following God's instructions. Something just didn't sit right in my spirit. God said, go speak to the rock, and Moses takes a stick and hits the rock. Why would he just do something different? I had to go back and investigate it. I know I've read the Bible over and over, but you don't remember everything. But then it dawned on me that the scriptures that I've been talking about where Moses smote the rock, that was the second instance, the second time that Moses asked God to provide water for the people and the animals. Now let's go back and look at the first time. Let's see how God speaks to Moses, and let's see what God's instructions are to Moses the first time that they need water. And we find that in Exodus, the 17th chapter. We go to Exodus now. Oh, this God of the Bible is a trickster, I tell you. Exodus 17th chapter. This is the first time that God gives water to the people. Let's read the story. I said we're talking Exodus 17. Nobody wants to talk about this. It's called, change glasses again. It's called Water Miraculously Supplied. This is the first time. This is the book of Exodus. The one about the smiting the rock. That's Numbers. You know, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. This is 2 books before the one where Moses hits the rock with the stick, with the rod. But look at this here. Water miraculously supplied. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journeys according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim. And there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the people did argue with Moses, and said, give us water that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, why chide ye with me? Why argue with me? Wherefore do you tempt the Lord? And the people thirst there for water. And the people murmured against Moses, and said, wherefore is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, what shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. God damn, they want to kill Moses. Now pay attention. God just asked Moses asked God a question. And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, what shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. And the Lord said unto Moses, go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod. See, the rod. He said, take thy rod, wherein thou smotest the river, take in thine hand, and go. And behold, God says, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt what? Smite the rock. And there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. See? There it is. And so in the first time that the children of Israel need water, God tells him to take his rod And it's assumption when he says, I want you to smite it, you're going to hit the rock with your rod. That's an assumption. See? Behold, I will stand there before you on the rock of Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock. God doesn't tell Moses to speak to the rock the first time. God tells Moses to hit, to crush, to smite the rock with his staff, with his rod. Stop there. Are y'all starting to see what's going on here? Are y'all starting to see what's going on here? Are you starting to see why Moses is confused? Why he gets it wrong? Because there's two different occasions where Moses delivers the water via God. In Numbers chapter 20, God tells Moses to hit the rock with your rod. Take your staff, take your rod. He says, take thy rod and smite the rock, and water will come out. That's what he did the first time. Moses followed the command to a T. And then God does something tricky 2 books later in the book of Exodus chapter 17. The people want water again. And Moses goes before God and says, I need water again. This time, although God tells Moses to take your staff, take your rod with you, but then God flips the script very quickly. God does some tricksterism. God plays with the words. He tells Moses to take his rod like he told him the first time in Numbers. And Moses does that. He takes his rod. But this sneaky God of the Bible, Moses thinking he already knows the game. He knows the plan. He knows the dealio. He knows the script. I'm going to take this staff. I'm going to take this rod. I'm going to smite this rock just like I did in Numbers, and water will appear. Moses doesn't even hear. I said Moses doesn't even hear or see or catch the misdirection, the sleight of hand, the 3-card Monty. Because he already knows how this thing goes. He already knows how water will come out the rock when he smites the rock, when he hits the rock, as he had done previously. And so when he goes to God a second time, there's already a predisposition. I gotta sneeze. It went down. He's already has a predisposition for what he must do. He probably doesn't even hear God say, speak to the rock, because he knows how God operates based on what he did previously. Previously, God doesn't tell Moses to speak to the rock. He says, smite the rock, hit the rock. And so on the second occasion, Moses is already pre-programmed to what he must do to bring forth water. He don't even, when God said speak to the rock, it went right over Moses' head. He didn't even hear that shit. And so what does he do? He smites the rock as he had done in the book of Numbers. Who's at fault here? Who's at fault? Now the Bible says in Malachi 3:6, I am the Lord your God, I change not. But he changed. God flipped the script on Moses. I said Malachi 3:6. This is a trickster God, I tell you. I said in the book of Malachi chapter 3 verse 6, God says, for I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. I change not. I don't change. I do it the way I do it. But when we go back and we compare Numbers and Exodus 17. It's Exodus 17 and Numbers 20. See, in Numbers 20, this is the second time that God delivers water through Moses, but God does some misdirection. God changes what he says. God tells Moses, and ye shall speak unto the rock. Speak ye unto the rock. Speak ye unto the rock. I said in Numbers, he says, speak to the rock. But in Exodus, he says to him, smite the rock with thy rod. See? And the Lord said unto Moses, here are the instructions. God is talking. God is doing some word salad. God is doing some sneaky shit. He's setting Moses up for failure. And so he first tells him in Exodus, go on before the people and take with thee of the elders of Israel and thy rod. Why does he take the rod? God says, take your rod, because he says right here, you're going to take your rod and thou shalt smite the rock with the rod. Smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it. So why does he tell him this in Exodus? And then we get over to Numbers, and he's talking on he flips the script, and he says, this time, I just want you to speak unto the rock. And then Moses, thinking that I know how this goes, and he tells the people, hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod, as he had done the first time, he smote the rock twice. The first time he smote the rock, it doesn't say how many times, but he smote it. He hit it with his rod. But this is where the trick comes in. God straightway comes and says, see, nigga. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron and said, because y'all believe me not to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given to thee. See, now Isaiah 1:18, can we go there for a minute? Isaiah 1:18 says, come now, and let us reason together. Let's use some reasoning here. I said Isaiah, the first chapter. The book of Isaiah, chapter 1, verse 18. What does it say? It says, come now, and let us reason together, saith the Lord. The Lord is saying to us, let's reason together. Okay? Let's reason together. Let's reason together. And when we reason together, I will say this boldly, frankly, pointedly, and truly, that if this was me or you in Moses' shoes, we would have done the exact same thing that Moses did. If the first time God tells us to take our rod and to smite the rock, and the water comes forth out of the rock, we are going to internalize. We're going to internalize how God works. And when the event comes up again, where they need water a second time, we have already internalized how this thing is going to work. I'm going to ask God. God's going to tell me to take my rod. And God is going to tell me to smite the rock. And water will come out abundantly. God doesn't tell Moses. I said, God doesn't tell Moses, I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to flip the script. I'm going to change my modus operandi, my MO. We're going to get water a little bit different. Moses, I know I told you the first time to smite the rock with your rod. This time, Moses, don't use your rod. Carry it with you. But I just want you to speak to the rock. I tell you, this God is vindictive as fuck. This is a, you know, when you study mythology, you study about the trickster gods. I'll just tell you. When you study mythology, in mythology, there is something called the trickster. A trickster god. Let me show you. Maybe I can show you. Grab a book that kind of talks trickster. Yeah. Here's a book right here. It's called Universal Myths. See, heroes, God, tricksters, and others. See right there? Tricksters. The book is called Universal Myths. See right there? Heroes, gods, tricksters. See, the Bible, the God of the Bible, he's a trickster. Don't you think he ain't? He's a trickster. That was a trick that God did to get Moses up out of there. It was a bullshit, lame, bogus excuse for Moses not to see the promised land. And I submit to you, every one of you, including me, we would have done the same thing Moses did. We would have internalized from the first experience how this water from the rock thing goes down. We would have totally missed the point where God says, speak to the rock. Because the first time the children of Israel need water, Moses goes before God, and God says, take your rod and smite the rock, and water will come forth. And damn it, Moses did the right thing the first time, and he saw results. Bam! Oh, there's water. And then when the children of Israel, on a second occasion, started choking and arguing with Moses because they were getting, the white lip. They were getting arid and dehydrated. They needed water for them and their animals. They started talking shit so much to Moses that Moses was in fear of his life. The Bible says that these people look like they want to stone. They want to stone me. It got so goddamn argumentative. The arguing was so loud and so fierce and so disrespectful that when Moses goes to God the first time, he says, God, these people want to stone me. They're asking a lot of questions about us being in the wilderness. They're asking some hella questions. And their questions have merit. You mean God brought us out here, out of Egypt, in the wilderness, so that we and our children and our beasts, our cattle would die from thirst? We gonna die from thirst? Moses, what the fuck is you gonna do? He heard the murmurs. Man, we should stone this motherfucker. We should stone this motherfucker and do a U-turn and go back to Egypt. That was the murmurings. We've been out here for, what, now, 11 years now? We should turn around, tuck our tails, and go back to Pharaoh. But before we go, we should kill this motherfucker. We should stone this motherfucker. Did you forget that? Did you forget that? I said the first time the water miraculously is supplied. Moses cried. He cried. He didn't add. He cried unto the Lord, saying, what shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me, to murder me, to kill me, to unalive me, to send me to my maker, God. I'm afraid They want water, and because we have no water, they are at the point where they be ready almost to stone my black ass. See? And so God again, God says, and the Lord said unto Moses, go on before the people and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod, and thy rod, and thy rod. Why take the rod? Because the rod was going to be needed to smote the rock. He didn't hit the rock with his hand, stupid. He took thy rod. God said, take your rod with you, wherewith thou smote the river, take in thine hand and go. And so Moses did that. And behold, God says, behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock with your rod, and there shall come water out of it that the people may drink. Now, why would he tell God that? And then go over to Exodus 20. See where we at? We in Exodus. And then go over to Numbers 20 and say some different shit. Moses already understands how the water game works now. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, he did the same thing. He told him, then take your rod. He told him back the first time. The first time when he told him, he said, take your rod. Take your rod, see? And thy rod. Oh, let me find it. Oh. And thy rod. See, the rod is central to this. The rod is central to the miracle. The first time he said, take your rod and smite the rock. The second time he did the same thing. He says, take your rod, nigga. Take your rod. But then he flipped the script. He says, and speak, not smote, but speak unto the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth water. See? So who's really in error here? Who's really at fault? I say God is. I say God flipped the script. I say God set Moses up for failure. What say you? What say you? We don't ever want to blame God for the sleight of hand and the misdirection and the word salad and flipping the script. Because Malachi 3:6 says, I am the Lord and I change not. But he clearly changed his modus operandi. He clearly changed the way he does shit. Why would Moses think that there was going to be a change in how the water comes from the rock? God told him in both scenarios, God says, take your staff. God talks about a rock. The staff and the rock are the two common themes in both versions in Exodus and Numbers. The rock and the staff. The rock and the staff. But in the first rock, he says, hit the motherfucker. Take your staff, take your rod, and hit it. Take your rod and beat the shit out of that rock, and water will come forth. And the second time, he says, just speak to the rock. This was God's plan all along to get Moses up out of there. I don't know. I don't know what God had against Moses, but God had a vendetta against Moses. All of the wondrous works that Moses had done through God by being a follower of God and following his instructions to the letter, to the T. And the one time that Moses falters and deviates and gets the message wrong, he got to go up in the mountains and die. But I contend to you, he was set up. The God of the Bible is a trickster God. And we can do a search of the word rod all throughout Exodus, which I've already done, God gave Moses the rod to use to do these things. Let me show you a couple examples. That by the time they get to the water situation with the rod, Moses has already used his rod a number of times to work some shit out in the name of God. Let me show it to you. Exodus 4. Exodus 4. I said we go to Exodus 4. This rod is the thing that would bring Moses down, but God is the one that gave Moses the rod. See? The rod of Moses. And Moses answered and said, but behold, they will not believe me, nor hearken unto my voice. For they will say, the Lord hath not appeared unto thee. And the Lord said unto him, what is that in thine hand? And Moses said, a rod. See? God is asking, the Lord is asking about the rod in Moses' hand, because the Lord is going to use the rod throughout this whole piece of 40-year fuckery. The rod is going to be essential to the miracle workings of God. And Moses said, it's a rod. And God said, cast it on the ground. And Moses, cast it on the ground. And it became a serpent, see? And Moses fled before it. And the Lord said unto Moses, put forth thine hand and take it by the tail. And as he put forth his hand and caught it, and it became a rod in his hand. See, the rod is always being used. Exodus 4, same chapter, verse 17. Here it is. And thou shalt take this rod in thine hand, wherewith thou shalt do signs. See, God gave power unto the rod of Moses. Power that in this rod, Moses would do signs. He would do signs. And that theme goes on. You can go to chapter 7. Chapter 7, verse 9. When Pharaoh speak unto you, saying, show a miracle for you, then thou shalt say unto Aaron, take thy rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent. See, the rod was God's tool. But it would be Moses' undoing in the end. Chapter 9. Chapter 9, verse 23. Chapter 9, verse 23. And Moses stretched forth his rod toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail. And the fire ran along upon the ground, and the Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt. See, the rod. When Moses stretched forth his rod towards heaven, the Lord sent thunder. The rod is a constant thing. Chapter 10, verse 13. And Moses stretched forth his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon the land all that day and all that night. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locust. See, but it was about stretching forth his rod. The rod is the tool that God was using. Chapter 14, I'm going to show you a few examples of how this rod is instrumental in what God was doing. Chapter 14, verse 16. But lift thou up thy rod, and stretch out thine hand over the sea, and divide it, and the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. Remember that in the movie Ten Commandments? God tells Moses to lift thou up thy rod, and stretch out thine hand over the sea, and divide it. But it's the rod that is the symbol of the majestical power of God. 17, talking about this rod. 17, 1 through 5. Oh, we already read that one. We got that one. So, what we have proven is that this trickster God, who from the first, even while Moses was in Egypt, when the children of Israel were still in servitude, in bondage, in slavery, the first thing that God says, hey nigga, Moses, what's that shit in your hand? Moses said, it's my rod. It's my staff, my rod. And God says, take the rod and throw that shit on the ground. And Moses threw his rod on the ground. A rod that he had for a long time. And that rod turned into a serpent, a snake. And Moses ran. I said, oh shit, oh my God. And God said, hold on, stop, don't run. Pick it up by its tail. And Moses was scared. Moses bent down and trusting God, he picked up that serpent, that snake by its tail, and it turned back into his rod. That was the first time. And so the rod becomes very instrumental. It is the thing whereby and through that God does all these miracles. Now check it, people, check it. Exodus 4 and 7. Excuse me, Exodus chapter 4, verses 2 and 3. God turns Moses' rod into a serpent. And then he does other miracles throughout Exodus. Take your rod, do this. Take your rod, do that. As a matter of fact, go stand on a mountain over there on a rock and take your rod and stretch out your hands. Stretch out your hand with your rod and I'm going to part the Red Sea for you. But the rod is there. The rod is the instrument. The rod is the tool. The rod is what conveys the majestic power of the Almighty. Every time Moses does a really important thing, the rod is instrumental. And then they go to the wilderness and then they need water. They're thirsty. They're dry. They're arid. They're dying from thirstiness. They're dehydrated. Moses says, hey God, these niggas about to stone me. They about to stone me because they need water and I can't do shit. What we gonna do? What we gonna do, God? As with all of the other miracles, as with taking that rod and throwing it down and making it turn into a snake in the beginning, as when Moses went to Pharaoh and threw his rod down and his rod again turned into a snake, as when Moses took his rod and dipped it in the water and the water turned to blood. This rod is a mighty, spectacular vehicle through which God works his miracles. As when God told Moses to go stand over there and stretch his arms open and he would divide and part the Red Sea. Stretch out your rod and I will do a mighty miracle. This rod had been super ingrained in Moses' cerebellum, his psyche, his medulla oblongata, his cerebral cortex, his cerebrum and his cerebellum. By the time we get to this, we need water shit, Moses already knows that the rod, it will be instrumental in bringing forth water. And sure enough, like clockwork. What does God say in Exodus 20? What does God say? Exodus 17, excuse me. Exodus 17, what does God say? You need water, Moses. The people need water. Their beasts need water. What does God say? Go get your rod. Did Moses have any second thoughts or qualms about getting his rod? No. Because he knew what the rod stand for. He knew that God worked his power through the rod of Moses. He had seen it from the beginning. He's seen it with Pharaoh. He's seen it when he stretched forth his arms with the rod and parted the Red Sea. And so when God tells him to get his rod, Moses knows exactly what the modus operandi, the M.O., the motif, the model, the ways, the doings of God. That this rod that God asked me about way back in Egypt, when the children of Israel were still in slavery, he would hearken back and think back to when God first talked to him and said, "What is that in your hand?" And Moses said, "That's my rod." The rod was a constant. And so this first event, the very first time that the children of Israel argued and chided with Moses, they argued with him so much that he heard murmurs that they were going to stone his black ass if he didn't come and give them some water soon. And he went before God, and like God had done so many other times involving his rod, he said, "Go get your rod. Grab thy rod. Grab thy rod." I said, just like God had done on so many previous occasions, when Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, "What shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me." And the Lord said unto Moses, "Go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod." It was a constant companion of Moses and God, the rod. "Wherefore thou smotest the river, take in thine hand, and go. And behold, I, God, will stand before thee upon a rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock with your staff." Not with your hand, with the staff. We know that because there is a history of using the rod to do miracles. So even though it doesn't say smite the rock with your staff, we can make that jump. That's an easy leap. That's not even a leap. That's tiptoeing through a puddle of water. That's all that is. He smote the rock with his staff. And God said, "There shall water come out of it, and the people may drink." This is what these so-called Bible teachers don't teach. That is the very first time that the children of Israel need water, God in fact and indeed tells Moses to grab your rod and go and smite it. Hit it with your staff, and water will pour forth abundantly from the rock. What a mighty miracle to take a tree branch, a staff, a rod, and simply hit a stone, and out of the stone tons and tons of water flow out. Do you know that when Moses did that the first time and he hit that rock with that rod, he said, "Oh shit, what in the fuck?" He had never seen such a thing. You got to understand, it was a sight to behold. It was a sight that would be etched in the memory and the mind of Moses for the rest of his natural life. He went to bed thinking about what he did through God earlier that day. God told me to take my staff, to take my rod, and to smite the rock. And I'm thinking, the fuck is that going to do? And sure enough, water came from it. What a mighty God we serve. Think of the impact. Think of how devastating and how impactful that miracle was on Moses' psyche. He thought about that shit for days and days and weeks. I hit a rock with the rod and water came out. And then, 2 books later, from Exodus to the book of Numbers, they come upon a thirst and a drought again. They want water again. By now, Moses he's a little fed up. He's a little angry. He ain't really, he loves the children of Israel, but he don't like them right about now. Because he heard the murmurs back in Exodus where they said they were going to stone him. There's a lot of motherfuckers that was in the wilderness that did not like Moses. And there was a lot of motherfuckers in the wilderness that Moses didn't like. Because Moses heard their murmurings. He heard their threats. He heard them talking shit. He heard them trying to get together and possibly stone him when he turned his back. So when it happens a second time, you damn right Moses is in his feelings. I gotta go save these niggas from drought that are plotting my motherfucking death. Moses, in the back of his mind, was saying, I wish some of these motherfuckers do die. I heard their moanings. I heard their threats. I heard them talking about wanting to make me 86 and green. They want me to take a dirt nap because they're thirsty. I heard you niggas over there. You plotting my demise. You want me to sleep with the earthworms. You damn right Moses was feeling some type of way, as he should. He did it once. He did a miracle through God once by smiting the rock with his staff and providing water. And now it happens again. And instead of these people believing that God through Moses can do it again, they start talking shit again. And Moses remembered. Moses remembered the first time. These niggas want to kill me. They want to execute me. And so when Moses goes to God the second time, Moses got a chip on his shoulder. Moses is in his feelings. Moses is feeling some type of way. Moses in his fifis. Moses like, these niggas, they want to kill me, Moses. God, if I don't provide water, they're going to kill me. And that's why it tells us in the book of Numbers, when he steps to him, Numbers 20, that's why Moses calls them niggas rebels. And when Moses, even though God said this time, every other time Moses does miracles, it involves his staff, his rod, every time. But this trickster God, this game playing God, this sleight of hand God, this petty God, knowing that Moses is not in the right state of mind, knowing that Moses is worried about his own life, knowing that Moses is damn near fed up with the people threatening and complaining about not enough water, when he goes to God on a second time, God pulls a fast one. God performs some sleight of hand. God switches his words up from smite the rock to speak to the rock. But Moses is not in the right frame of mind to hear no goddamn speak to the rock. He's upset. He's mad. He's angry. He's in his feelings. He ain't really feeling half of the people out there because half of them want him dead anyway. And he already knows how this shit goes down. I gotta hit this, I gotta use my rod and I gotta hit the rock and water will come from the rock just like it happened the first time. That's the state of mind and the mentality that Moses is in. And God, being the creator of the universe, knowing every thought in Moses' head, he knows what Moses is thinking, but decides to play a trick on Moses. A quick little trick that goes over Moses' head. And that is, go down there and speak to the rock. Moses didn't even hear that shit. Moses didn't even hear speak to the rock. Because he already knew how the miracle game worked. He already knew that the miracle game involved his rod. So, in Moses' mind, because he was heated and upset and angry and frightened at what they were going to do to him, stone him, when God said, go down there and speak to the rock. God said that shit so matter-of-factly that Moses it didn't even register in his mind. That speak to the rock, he didn't hear it. He didn't hear it. Moses was a mixed bag of emotions. Everything from anger to fear raged in Moses behind the lack of water. And God knew that. But this trickster God played a trick on Moses. This trickster God, if he wasn't a trickster God, he would say the same thing he said the first time. Go to that rock and smite the rock. Smote the rock. As he did the first time. Exodus 17:6. Moses wasn't even even in the right frame or state of mind to have a conversation with God. And God knew that. And that's why God was able to slip that little, go speak to the rock. 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 That shit didn't register. What Moses heard was, go smote the rock. Go smote the rock. Go smote the rock as you did the first time. And Moses, he went over to that rock. But before he smote it, he was angry. So angry that he lost his way and got a little big-headed. Not intentionally. The children of Israel pushed his mental processes to make him say, what did he say? Let's read it. Moses wasn't even in his right frame of mind when he said this bullshit. I said Moses wasn't in his right frame of mind when Moses said to the Hebrews, hear now, ye rebels. The fact that Moses calls the Hebrews, the children of Israel, and the mixed multitude, the fact that he calls them rebels tells you what state of mind he's in. He calls them rebels because they are rebelling against God. They are rebelling against him. They want to kill him. They want to stone him. He calls them rebels. And in his diatribe, in his anger, he calls them rebels and says, must we fetch you water out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod, like the first time he did it, he smote the rock twice. Goddamn. Clearly, Moses was not himself, and God knew it. I had to talk about this because I know that Moses was treated very unfairly by the children of Israel and by God himself. Moses was a psychological mess. Getting pressure from the Hebrews, mixed multitude, and getting pressure to follow God's directive to the letter. But it's God's fault. For God could have simply said to Moses, Moses, I know I've used the rod in times past to turn it to a serpent, to make the rivers run with blood red, to part the Red Sea. But this time, Moses, take thy rod. But this time, Moses, I simply want you to speak to the rock. Do not hit the rock with your rod like we did the first time we gave these niggas water. That would have snapped Moses. That would have signaled, that would have jarred something in Moses' brain to say, we have a different way of doing shit. I got you, God. Don't hit it. Just speak to it. But like a magician who waves his wand, this trickster God named Yahweh, he waved his verbiage quickly. Go speak to the rock. He said it so fast that Moses did not register it in his brain. Simply because Moses had been here before on multiple occasions using the rod as some telekinesis, some object that carried the magical and mystical and majestical power of God. And that Moses had known that God had used his rod, and that through that rod, shit worked, shit got done. How are you going to blame Moses? And we all read this shit every day in church, every day as a Hebrew Israelite, every day as an Israelite. Somebody reads this story, but they don't want to go into the psychology of this shit. They don't want to, I'm looking for somebody real quick. They don't want to look at the psychology of this shit. Let me see if I can find. I got a list of great psychologists here. Let me see if I can find them real quick. There we go. Every day, somebody in church, some stupid YouTuber talking Bible, will talk about Moses and not want to talk about Moses' psychological disadvantage. That his brain, his mind was in a goddamn wreck. It was like jello. See, if the great psychologists of the world, if they were reading this story, they would tell you some things. They would see what I'm seeing. If Sigmund Freud, if B.F. Skinner, if Abraham Maslow, if Naim Akbar, if Ivan Pavlov, the great psychologists of the world, if they were looking at this story about Moses, they would see why Moses grabbed his staff and smote the rock, even though God said, speak to the rock, because he was already preconditioned. I said, God was preconditioned. I said, Moses was preconditioned. What would psychologists like Francis Cress Welsing say? What would Jean Piaget say? What would Eric Erickson say? What would Carl Rogers say? What would Alfred Adler say? What would Edward Thorndike say? What would Carl Jung say? See? Fact of the matter is, this story about Moses has not been evaluated from a psychological point of view. The great schools of psychology structuralism and functionalism and Gestalt psychology and behaviorism and psychoanalysis and humanism and cognitivism and biopsychology, the great schools of psychology, they would tell you what I'm telling you about Moses' mind state, his mind, his brain. And this God that we serve, this so-called trickster God named Yahweh, Yahuwah, Yahweh, Yahweh, Jehovah, the great I am, Hashem, the name, supposed to be all-knowing, omnipotent, and omniscient, knows the thoughts and of the heart. He knows us from beginning to end. He knows we are faulty. He knows we are emotional. He knows we are jealous like he's jealous. He knows all these things. He knows all these things. But this God, petty as a motherfucker, knowing good goddamn well that the first time he told Moses to get water from the rock, he told him to slap it, to hit it, to smote it. Why would God change his modus operandi the second time and just say speak to it? Knowing good goddamn well that Moses did not hear that. That information to speak instead of hit did not register with Moses' brain. God is supposed to be all-knowing, all good. He knew that Moses would falter. He knew that Moses would err. He knew that Moses wasn't going to hear when he did a sleight of hand. When Moses did his three-card Monty. That's all he did. He did three-card Monty. Speak to the rock. Moses didn't hear that shit. Speak to the rock. He said that fast. Moses, speak to the rock. Speak to the rock. Why would God change the way he got watered from the first time? What was the difference between God telling Moses the first time to smite it, to hit the rock, and then changing up and then saying just simply speak to the rock? While at the same time, God tells Moses to take your staff, take your rod with you. See, that's what Moses understood. When God told him the second time, take thy staff, take thy rod. That's all Moses heard. When Moses picked up that rod the second time, he knew that what he must do, it was just like the first time, smite the rock. But he did not hear God say, speak to the rock. That was the tricksterism. And as I said a few minutes ago, God could have easily stopped Moses, knowing that he did not hear, knowing that it did not register and compute in his brain. He could have stopped Moses directly and said, did you hear what I said? Don't smite the rock this time. Simply speak to the rock. But God allows Moses to trip, falter, stumble, and make a mistake. And for that mistake, God says, I don't forgive you. I'm petty as a motherfucker. I'm proud and I'm unjust. And I'm unforgiving. And I'm a control freak. I'm a God who controls. And because you did not praise me, not only did you hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock, you made the shit about you and them. You said, how many times must we, me and Aaron? Motherfucker, didn't I tell you I'm jealous? Didn't I tell you I want all the praise and glory? Motherfuck what I did out there in the universe. I need your praise. I need my creation's praise. I need my creation's worship. I need my creation's co-signage. I need to hear it from my creation that I'm great and I'm good and I'm terrible. Deuteronomy 27:21 and Deuteronomy 10:17. I'm a great and I'm a good and I'm a terrible God. Deuteronomy 10:17. Deuteronomy 7:21. I need that. My ego must be stroked. I need to be told. I need to be sanctified among the people. I need the people to know that it's me that's giving them the water, not you. And I'm jealous as fuck. And when you try to take my credit, that's a death sentence, Moses. And you have just gotten a death sentence. Now take your monkey ass up into the mountain and build you a sepulcher and find somebody to put you in that bitch, because you're not going to the promised land. And with that, y'all, I just wanted to let you know I'm with Moses on this one. The God of the Bible is a trickster God. And that's all I have to say about that.